Hello. We're happy today to speak to Ruth Irwin. Ruth is director for a climate consultancy and an adjunct professor at our MIT University. She was professor of education at the University of Aberdeen and the University of Fiji. Ruth is passionate about a safe transition from business as usual to a post-growth world where accelerating climate change is a thing of the past. She is creative, wide-ranging, and acute original thinker. Ruth is a leading voice in climate change and the humanities. Her work has been translated into 18 languages. She has delivered over 100 lectures globally, including as an expert speaker at the UNESCO Conference on Climate Change and Biodiversity in Monaco. She has written over 60 articles, published 2 monographs and 3 edited collections, along with the joint book Wild Pedagogies in 2018. We have Heidegger Politics and Climate Change, which was published by Bloomsbury in 2008. The collection Climate Change and Philosophy came out with Bloomsbury in 2010. A handbook of New Zealand educational policy came out the same year. Beyond the Free Market was published in 2014. Her latest book has just been released by Rowman and Littlefield and is titled Economic Futures, Climate Change and Modernity. Welcome, Ruth. My first question for you is, what is the connection between climate change and economic growth?
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. Yes, so climate change is very directly related to economic growth. In the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they talk about business as usual, which is a sort of a pseudonym really for economic growth. And they've been using that framework of business as usual for for well over 10 years, since about 2001. 20 years now. And one of the things about economic growth is that it's exponential. So it is increasing every year. The rate of economic growth is actually increasing every year. Governments try and keep it down to 2 or 3%. But as we know, with inflation, it has been about 6 or 7% in the last couple of years. So that actually causes enormous amounts of positive reinforcement, if you like, for consumerism. And one of the problems with extra consumerism is that it creates extra emissions. So there is a 95% correlation between economic growth and emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And what we can see there is, because it's an exponential curve, that increase has really hit the acceleration button about 2010. So from about the 70s till about 2010, you had a rate of growth of about 2 parts per million extra in the atmosphere every year. And since 2010, that rate has gone from 0.18 up to 0.3. So that's almost doubled the rate of increase, acceleration of emissions. So despite all the amazingly good work that's taking place in doing things like new technology, sustainable energy, electric cars, people thinking about recycling and the circular economy. So there's a whole lot of really wonderful work that's taking place. But unfortunately, as the economy grows, it absorbs all of that extra efficiency gain and just grows more consumerism. So all of those efficiency gains with the wonderful new technologies are absorbed and actually exceeded by economic growth. So until we solve economic growth, we cannot solve climate change. It's very, very simple.
Okay, and why is economic growth so sacrosanct? And how does it work exactly?
That is a very, very important question. And it's not one that people talk about in great detail very often. So this new book that I've just put out, Economic Futures, is really talking about the driver for economic growth. And it's taken me a long time to figure out what that driver was, because for a long time, I sort of bought into the neoliberal rhetoric, which is that you have the perfect market, and there's a balance between price and the cost of the price creates a balance between the cost of production and the benefits to the consumer. And that then you have, progress, and progress emerges because producers want to increase their productivity and increase the market share. And so they create efficiency gains. But those efficiency gains are not actually about reducing emissions or anything sensible like that. They're about reducing costs. So you either lower the wages, or you make a better product, or you create efficiency gains in the production cycle. So I kind of was very engaged and involved in thinking about technology and efficiency gains and progress as the driver for economic growth. But what I've discovered in the writing of this book is that it's something else entirely. It's banking. So what happens with private banks is that they create money usually for mortgages. So they create credit ex nihilo, which means out of nothing. So the money is brand new and it starts to circulate into the economy. And the amounts that we're talking about are millions and millions and millions an hour of new money that is going pouring like a waterfall into the economy. And what it does is it creates price inflation. So effectively, what the banks are doing is they are robbing the value of the overall circulation of value, the market. That money, that value is getting absorbed into this extra flood of cash that's going into the economic system. And actually, it's not cash, it's electronic money, because banks don't have the right to make cash. That is only made by governments. It's sovereign money. But the amount of sovereign money in the UK, for example, and the UK is fairly typical of most countries, is about 3% of new money that circulates in the economy. So 97% of new money is actually emerging from private banking when they make mortgages, which is quite astonishing. And what that new money does, 97% of that new money every year is pushing inflation into the system, which actually creates a lot of extra profit for producers and shops and things like that. And I mean, it's hard on the consumers because obviously the prices are going up. So the money, the value is actually coming out of the labor that the consumers contribute to the economy. But the profit that is going to businesses then gets, redeployed. They can then buy an extra house or an extra car or an extra holiday. And so that produces economic growth. That's how that money starts to circulate out into the real economy and stop, and it's no longer abstract. So I hope that
sounds like a good deal for the banks, doesn't it?
It's a really wonderful deal for the banks because they make that money out of nothing, literally ex nihilo, out of nothing. All they do is write a line in the, if somebody walks into a bank and says, I've got a really great job, I can pay back a mortgage over 30 years, could you please loan me $1 million so that I can buy that house down the road? And the bank says, yes, you seem like a very good creditor. We are very happy to lend you this money that we don't actually have, but we will invent it. And it goes into a line on your bank account that you now have a debt. So that for a bank, that's an asset, right? $1 million asset. And then on the seller's bank, so you've just paid $1 million to the person selling you the house. That's another line because this is double entry bookkeeping. So there's another new line for them to have $1 million asset. So in fact, every time somebody walks into a bank and asks for $1 million to buy a house, the banks are creating $2 million, and that money is then starts to flush into the system. and create inflation. And that's what creates stimulus, and the stimulus then creates economic growth. So it's not a straightforward equation. The money has to percolate into the real economy before it starts to make these economic growth effects.
Yeah,
So it's not a straightforward Ponzi scheme. It's a circuitous Ponzi scheme.
yeah, and in the United States in 2007 and 2008, they decided to lend to poor people who couldn't afford houses money that they knew that they would be able to, foreclose and just say, "See you later."
Yeah. Interesting about that. A lot of people that's really when I began thinking properly about banking. And a lot of people did start thinking properly about banking. And actually, some of our best minds belong to the banking fraternity because you can get much more money, much better salary doing mathematics for a bank than can for a chemistry company or something. So there are actually really wonderful people working for banks. But interestingly, they sort of, again, banks have an amazing ability to make you look over here. They're very distracting instead of actually looking at the actual process that is taking place, because the actual process that is taking place is so ridiculously simple and so ridiculously outrageous. Why is it, Michael, that you can't write me a line in my Excel spreadsheet offering me $1 million, and I will then go down the road and buy $1 million house? Like, there is literally no reason why I can't get a loan from my auntie in the same way that a bank creates a loan, because they don't have the money. They don't own the money. The money doesn't exist. The money is a figment of the imagination. And one of the questions that I ask in this book is, well, how did this come about? It's so extraordinary. And it came about, I went right back to Mesopotamia, actually. There's a chapter there in Mesopotamia, which is where debt first emerged, which is really interesting. Writing and debt emerge at the same time. In fact, writing emerges because of debt. And then I kind of jumped forward to Italy. In Italy, in around about the 1400s, slightly before the Medicis, the Italian bankers started to come up with double entry bookkeeping. So they invented double entry bookkeeping. And when you invent double entry bookkeeping, the Medicis and the Italian bankers realized that nobody actually knew how much gold was sitting in their strong room in the back, and that they could probably lend more than they actually held, because nobody actually knew how much was there except for them. And so they started to lend a lot more than they actually held in the back room. And double entry bookkeeping helped them kind of sort of make that official sounding and sound as though they knew what they were doing. But there's absolutely no legislation in any country that allows ex nihilo banking to take place. It's just become a sort of a accepted habit, and the banks try really hard to make sure that nobody knows that that's what they're actually doing.
So this imaginary credit seems to be an engine behind the economic growth.
Yes, absolutely. It is the engine behind economic growth. Without this extraordinary amount of new credit going into the system, there wouldn't be much economic growth at all, if any. You would have a stable system, because people would go to work, they'd earn their wages, they'd go down to the shop and buy whatever it was that they wanted. You could still have like global transactions. Global economic systems is very, very old. It goes right back to the Silk Road. In fact, it's probably earlier than that, because if you have a look at sort of archaeological evidence, you'll find that, Irish people have got, really early Iron Age items that actually come from Europe or come from the Middle East. So there's clearly been trade for thousands of years. So global trade is a very different thing from ex nihilo more, finance. And obviously, capital helps to lubricate global trade. So global trade would not probably be as prolific as it is now, but it will still be maintained. You will still be able to get things globally once you take the finance system and pull it apart and rejuvenate it in a more ethical way.
About the only thing that we have is some sort of nested group that's at the top has a country that says we're big and powerful, and so count on us. And if banking is, it looks like it might with these all these computer currencies that they don't even have countries, then we could get into quite a sticky wicket.
Yes, you're right. So, and that you're raising a really important point there, Michael, because this issue is a global issue. Climate change is a global issue. And no one country can do this on its own. Like if one country were to say, right, we've recognized that banking is stimulating economic growth and we want to stop economic growth because we realize there's a 95% correlation between economic growth and emissions growth, and they try to do that on their own, then they will go bankrupt, but the rest of the world will continue to create emissions, and those emissions will continue to pollute the globe, the planetary commons, the planetary atmosphere. So this is a global social problem, but it's a social problem. We have control over social problems. We can do something about social problems. So although it sounds and feels immense, and a little bit out of our reach, we can't even really use democratic processes to cope with this because all political parties, whether they're left or right, have to deal with the reality of what is happening right now, today. And what is happening right now today is that all political parties have to deal with the economic growth cycle that their country and the global commons is in. So we can't really rely on national or nation states to deal with this issue. It is a global issue. And if we were to, or when, we definitely will have to change the banking system because the climate change impacts now are becoming so immense. I mean, you've seen what happened in Spain a day or two ago, where 95 people died, and you can see just, thousands of cars washing down the streets, all the damage that's happening to Valencia and those cities, all the soil runoff that's taking place, the impact on animals and plants and trees. We've seen the forest fires that happened in Australia where 3 billion animals died.
Wow.
In the 2020 forest fires. The extinction rate that is happening right now is on a par with the extinction rate of the dinosaurs when the dinosaurs became extinct. So we've already reached a point where the impacts of economic growth are offsetting any of the benefits of economic growth. There are only a select few that actually benefit from economic growth, and they are major corporations, global corporations. Not everyday people. Everyday people are not benefiting to any huge extent. And everyday people are the ones that are paying the price with their lives for these climate impacts. So we are definitely at a point, but we haven't quite understood what the issue is that is driving economic growth. So that's why this book, I think, is a game changer, because it really, really spells out very clearly how economic growth takes place. And it's very simple to deal with. We actually have to just regulate at a global level so that every country signs the dotted line, and on the same day, that regulation takes place all over the world, and that regulation makes ex nihilo mortgages illegal. Illegal. And what replaces it? I don't know. That's not the role of the book. The book is just to say, this is the issue. This is the problem. This is the driver for economic growth. And that is driving climate emissions.
And so we
And
have each country democratically dealing with it, and then the countries together kind of trying to find consensus.
I think probably what's going to happen, it's going to be more of a grassroots thing.
Mhm.
So it'll be you and I telling our friends and going, wow, we've got direction now. Because, just about everybody wants to do something about climate change. Everybody understands what a huge issue it is. Some people are in denial, but the denial is actually a reaction. It's an emotional reaction where people can't cope with how devastating it is. So they go into denial. So I would say that 100% of people out there actually understand that climate change is happening and want to. If they thought they could do something about it, they would definitely be doing something about it. And a lot of people have sort of taken the personal role. I'm not going to eat meat. I'm going to have an electric car. I'm going to ride my bicycle. I'm going to make sure that I work close to where I live, etc. And so people are really, really trying hard, but there's a sense of frustration because no matter how hard they try, climate change just keeps getting worse. Emissions keep getting worse. We haven't been able to do anything to stop it. We sign the IPCC COP, 26 in Paris to say emissions have to stay beneath 1.5 degrees. Well, this year we overshot 1.5 degrees for the first time already. And it wasn't supposed to happen till 2030. So it's actually happening much faster than people have, even scientists have been able to keep up with. So I think this book it's landing at the right moment. It's when it's giving direction to people. This is what we can really do. It's a massive change. It's a really substantial transition. There's no joking or trying to minimize how substantial it is, but it is very doable, and it will leave us with a highly sophisticated technological civilization where we have markets, where we have where we look after each other through consumerism. Actually, we can maintain consumerism. We just don't have the economic growth that goes with it. That's what's driving climate emissions.
This sounds like a wonderful discussion, Ruth, and I'm glad we had kind of a teaser section here that will get people, to want to go further and have a look at economic futures, climate change, and modernity. It's something we've got to get a hold of, because if we don't get a hold of it, it'll get a hold of us.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye bye.